In 1999, I lost my husband. In 2015, my son told me I was no longer his mother. And in 2025, I woke up in a trailer with a leaky roof, no cat, and nothing left but my pride and a stack of court folders nobody asked me to keep. I used to think that was the punchline of my life. I was wrong. The night before everything changed, rain dripped through the ceiling right above my recliner. That's what you get when you live in a 30-year-old single-wide on the edge of a trailer park in coastal Texas and pretend tarps are a long-term roofing solution. I could have moved in with my daughter years ago, but that would have meant swallowing my pride. Easier to buy a bucket at Dollar General. The rain fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Plink, plink, plink. The TV was on one of those late-night crime shows where some woman ignores all the red flags and then everyone pretends to be surprised when her husband turns out to be a sociopath. I muted it. I didn't need the commentary. I stared at the framed photo on the wall across from me. My husband, Mark, grinning at the camera in a faded Astros cap, his arm around a younger version of me. I looked tired in that picture too, just less hollow. Our daughter, Becca, was sitting on his shoulders, her baby fists wrapped in his hair. Our son, Danny, half hidden behind us, scowling because he didn't like pictures. My whole family in one frame. Frozen there, 13 years before the cancer, and 16 years before my son looked me in the eye and said, "You're not my mother anymore." People think there's a moment when your heart breaks. A sound, a crack, something dramatic. It's not like that. It's just a quiet little shift inside you where everything rearranges itself around a new truth. My son was done with me. My daughter, too. We hadn't spoken in... Hell, I'd stopped counting. It was easier. So now it was just me, the rain, and the hole in the roof. And no cat. Even the cat had left. I'd taken him in from the park, a skinny gray Tom with a crooked ear who decided my porch was good enough. I called him Mr. One day, the door got left open, and Mr. decided he had better options. Can't say I blame him. I shifted in my recliner and felt the familiar ache in my knees. 60 isn't ancient, but when you've worked retail, cleaned houses, and walked through more courthouse hallways than most lawyers, your joints feel every year. My trailer smelt like damp wood, coffee, and old paper. The last one courtesy of the plastic bins stacked under my folding table. Each one was labeled Evictions, 2001 to 2009, Smith versus Martinez, Park Complaints, Medical Building Disputes, Other Idiots. Those were my trophies. Some people collected figurines. I collected lawsuits. That's what happens when life backs you into corners and your only weapon is a pen and an attitude problem. I'd sued slumlords, crooked mechanics, and a doctor's office that tried to double charge me for an MRI I never got. I'd written complaints, appeals, rebuttals. I knew how to read contracts better than half the people who wrote them. Apparently, I was very good at fighting, not so good at loving. So, when the knock came on my door that night, I already knew who it was. "Turn that TV down, Nora, I can hear it from the next county," my neighbor called through the thin metal door. I snorted. "It's muted, Ruth. Maybe your hearing aid's picking up ghosts." Ruth laughed, a raspy smoker's laugh. "Open up! He's at it again!" That man was Kyle, 2 lots down. Some genius who thought living in a trailer park was an excuse to turn his speakers up loud enough to shake the rust off the siding. Every time he got drunk, everybody knew it. I pushed myself up, my knees complaining, and shuffled to the door. The linoleum was cold under my bare feet. I opened it to find Ruth, standing there in her faded pink robe and slippers that had seen better centuries. Her curly hair was piled up like a soft storm cloud, and she had that look in her eye, the one that meant she was ready for mischief. "You hear it?" she said. I stepped out onto the small concrete stoop. The night air was heavy and wet, the rain now just a mist. Across the gravel lane, Kyle's windows glowed blue with whatever explosion-heavy nonsense he was watching. He remembered everyone's names. Or he was good at pretending. "Linda," he said, shaking my hand with both of his, squeezing just a second longer than necessary.
Mark talks about you all the time. You did a wonderful job raising him. I felt my hackles go up right there. Compliments about your parenting from strangers always feel like they finish with an invisible considering. Still, I smiled, said thank you, did the polite thing. Then I met her. Her name is Ashley. Long blonde hair, baby blue eyes, lashes so thick I'd need 2 pairs of reading glasses to see the real ones underneath. She was one of the worship singers, always on stage, hands lifted, voice trembling on all the emotional parts. After the service, Mark brought her over. His face lit up. "Mom, this is Ashley. We're in the young adults group together." Ashley gave me that bright, practiced smile some young women give older women, somewhere between, "Hi, ma'am," and "Please don't be mad that I'm prettier." "I've heard so much about you," she said. I believed that about as much as I believed my ex when he said the affair was just emotional. We did the getting to know you dance. She worked part-time at a boutique, took online classes when she had time, lived with a roommate on the other side of town. Very into church, very into serving, very into talking about herself. Still, I tried. I really did, because Mark liked her, and I love my son. Things moved fast. Within 3 months, Ashley was suddenly at every family dinner, dropping hints about someday and when I have a husband, posting pictures of Mark on her Instagram with captions like, "Feeling so blessed," and "God really restores." She was sweet to my face, a little too sweet. Like store-bought icing, sugar and chemicals, no substance. I'd ask about her plans, career, school, anything beyond whatever worship song was stuck in her head, and she'd kind of drift off. "Well, Pastor Dan says we shouldn't get too caught up in worldly goals," she'd say. "He's really been counseling me about focusing on building a godly family." Pastor Dan this, Pastor Dan that. I'd hear Pastor Dan told us about finances, about relationships, about boundaries with your parents. That last one was the first time I really felt something crack. "Boundaries?" I repeated when Mark brought it up one evening. "Son, I changed your diapers. I think we're past boundaries." "It's not like that, Mom," he said, fiddling with his keys. "It's about building our own life, you respecting that Ashley and I are a unit now." They weren't even engaged yet. I bit my tongue. I'm not a perfect mother, but I know when pushing too hard just makes a boy dig his heels in. Then came the pregnancy scare. At least that's what I was told. Mark showed up at my house one Saturday afternoon, pale and shaky. "Mom, can we talk?" Sure. Mom can always talk. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he did his homework in 8th grade, and said, "Ashley thought she was pregnant." "How late?" I asked, practical, as always. 3 days, he said. 3 days. I nodded slowly. "And you two are using protection?" I asked as delicately as a 60-year-old woman can. He flushed. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Yeah, we're careful. We're not stupid." I didn't believe the "we're not having sex" thing when he first said it months ago, but I wasn't going to push that button. Still, something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. "What did Pastor Dan say?" I asked, only half sarcastic. Mark didn't even catch the tone. He said it was a wake-up call. He said God might be trying to tell us we're not living right, that we need to either commit or stop acting like we are. I stared. Did he say anything about getting a better brand of condom, or was it all fire and brimstone life coaching? "Mom," I held up my hands. "Fine. So what now?" "She isn't pregnant," he said. "She took another test, but we talked. We think maybe we should move the wedding up, get engaged. We're already basically there, you know? I looked at my 32-year-old son, who paid his bills on time and changed my oil without being asked, and saw a scared kid. "I think you should slow down," I said carefully. "Don't marry someone because Pastor Perfect is pressuring you, or because you're scared of a maybe baby." He nodded. He said he understood. 2 weeks later, he called to tell me he'd proposed. The engagement turned the church into a machine. Suddenly, Ashley and Mark were the couple. Their picture was in the church newsletter. They were held up as an example in small groups. Pastor Dan dedicated entire sermon illustrations to them. When I was counseling Mark and Ashley, he started dropping by my house. No warning, just in the area. Every visit started with charm. "Sister Linda, I just love your son so much."
I feel like he's my own. Every visit ended the same way. Subtle digs and suggestions. You know, we've been talking about healthy distance from family after marriage. You wouldn't want to smother them, right? Young couples need space to flourish. Or, sometimes Satan uses even good things, like moms, to distract us from God's plan for our lives. I didn't say what I wanted to. Sometimes Satan uses 40-something pastors who spend a lot of time with 20-something blondes instead of their wives, because I didn't want to give him any ammunition. But I started paying attention. You live 60 years, you learn to read people, especially men who think they're special. I noticed how often Ashley was at the church on non-service days, how many late-night rehearsals there suddenly were, how often Pastor Dan would text during family dinners, always about some urgent ministry thing that needed Ashley's input. I noticed the way he touched her shoulder when he walked by, the way she glowed under his attention, more than she ever glowed with Mark. I noticed that his long-suffering wife, Karen, always looked tired. One evening, about 3 months before the wedding, I dropped something off at the church. Mark had left his dress shirt at my house and texted me, asking if I could bring it before their premarital counseling session. It was a Tuesday. The parking lot was almost empty. I walked down the hallway toward the offices, my footsteps echoing on the tile. As I passed the counseling room, I heard laughter. Ashley's laugh, high and breathy, and a man's deeper voice. I paused. The door was partially closed, but not all the way. I probably wouldn't have looked if I hadn't heard my son's name. "Mark would freak out if he knew," Ashley was saying, giggling. "It's just between us," Pastor Dan replied, voice low and soft. "Mark is a good guy, but he's not on your level spiritually. You and I have a connection he just doesn't understand yet." I inched closer, heart thumping. Through the crack in the door, I saw them. Not kissing, not touching anything more than her knee. His hand was resting on it lightly, but the intimacy in that little office was thick as fog. Ashley was leaning toward him, eyes wide, lips parted. If you erased the Bibles on the small table between them, it could have been a scene from some cheesy romance movie. I should have walked in. I should have said something. I should have thrown the door open and asked why my future daughter-in-law looked like she wanted to climb into her pastor's lap. Instead, I froze. My fingers dug into the fabric of Mark's dress shirt. I felt like I'd swallowed ice. Then I heard a chair scrape and instinct kicked in. I stepped away from the door and kept walking, like I'd just come in. By the time I knocked, they were on opposite sides of the room, Bibles open, Pastor Dan with his concerned spiritual leader face on. "Linda, so good to see you." Dropping something off? My eyes went from him to Ashley. Her cheeks were flushed. Her hair was a little mussed. "Yeah," I said, voice flat. I held up the shirt. "Mark left this." Ashley leapt up like she'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. But instead of shame,
There was irritation. At me. "I thought he had it in the car," she said quickly. "Apparently not," I said. Pastor Dan smiled, oblivious or pretending to be. "You're such a blessing, Linda, always taking care of Mark." "Yep, that's me, the blessing." All the way home, my gut screamed. But without something solid, what could I say? "Honey, I think your pastor wants to do more than pray with your fiancé." Mark already thought I was too critical of his church. So I watched and waited. 2 months before the wedding, Ashley announced she was pregnant. She did it at church. Of course. During service. Of course. On stage. Of course. Pastor Dan had them come up to the front. He put an arm around them both like a proud father and said, "Church family, we have some exciting news. Mark and Ashley have just found out they are expecting. We know the timing isn't what they planned, but we serve a God who brings beauty from ashes." The congregation erupted in applause and amen and those little sniffles people do when they're overcome with feelings only vaguely connected to the actual situation. I sat frozen in the pew. I did the math. I'm not stupid. If Ashley was as far along as she was implying, that baby would have been conceived right around the time Mark worked a 2-week conference out of state. I remember the dates because I watched his cat. I sat through the rest of the service in a daze. People kept squeezing my hand, whispering congratulations. I wanted to scream. Afterward, in the lobby, Ashley beamed at me, hand on her still flat stomach. "Can you believe it?" she gushed. "We're going to have a honeymoon baby before the honeymoon. God's timing is so funny." Funny isn't the word I'd use. "Did you see a doctor yet?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Not yet," she said. "Just tests, but the lines were like so dark. Pastor Dan says it's definitely real, and he felt God tell him this baby is going to be really special, like set apart." Of course, Pastor Dan had thoughts about the baby. Mark walked up then, eyes bright, nervous but proud. "Mom," he said, "we're going to move the wedding up. Pastor Dan says we should get married as soon as possible. The church is going to help with everything." I pulled him aside. "Mark," I said quietly, "how far along is she?" He shifted. "They think maybe 8 weeks?" "She?" I repeated. "Or they?" He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a deep breath. "You were gone for 2 weeks at that conference. You remember, you left on the 5th, came back on the 19th. "So?" he said. "So," I said, "if she's 8 weeks along, that means inception was right smack in the middle of that trip." He flushed. "You don't know how far along she is, Mom. You're not a doctor." "Neither is Pastor Dan," I snapped. "And if she hasn't even seen one yet, where is she getting that number?" He stared at me, jaw tight. "Why are you doing this? Why can't you just be happy for me?" "Because I'm trying to protect you," I said. "Something isn't right." "It's your math that isn't right," he said. "We were together before I left. Stop implying she—" "I'm not implying anything," I said, voice dropping. "I'm saying check the dates. Use your brain." He shook his head. "I knew you'd react like this. Pastor Dan said it'd be better if we didn't tell you yet, but Ashley wanted to include you." Pastor Dan said, I started, then stopped. "You know what? Congratulations." I walked out before he could answer. Because if I stayed, I was going to say something I couldn't take back. The next month was a blur of tension. Anytime I raised a concern, it was negativity and spiritual attack. Any question I asked was judgment. When I suggested they at least get a basic timeline from an actual OBGYN, Ashley burst into tears and sobbed about how I thought she was a liar. The church rallied around the poor young couple being persecuted. Guess who was the persecutor? 1 week before the wedding, I got a text from an unknown number. Unknown. You don't know me, but I think you're right about Ashley and Pastor Dan. My heart stopped. I stared at the message, then typed back, Me, who is this? There was a long pause. Unknown. I can't say. I still go to the church, but I've seen things. Late-night private meetings, him driving her home and sitting in the car for a long time. I overheard her bragging to a friend that she could have either of them if she wanted. My fingers trembled. Me? Why are you telling me this? Unknown. Because Mark is a good guy, and Pastor Dan isn't. Check Ashley's Instagram. Look at the dates of some of their counseling sessions and when Mark was out of town. Then nothing. They didn't answer again. I sat at my kitchen table, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, and felt this cold, focused anger settle over me. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a pattern, a story, and I was done. I tried to talk to Mark one last time. I did the calm, rational thing, printed calendars, pointed out overlaps, explained my concerns. He listened with his jaw clenched, eyes full of that same mixture of hurt and indignation. I love you, I told him. I will always love you, but I don't trust that girl, and I definitely don't trust that pastor. He stood up. Then don't come to the wedding. But I'm stubborn. I went anyway. You know the rest of that part. The slap, the cake, the grape juice, the security guards, my son disowning me in front of 2 strangers with earpieces. What you don't know is that as I stood outside that banquet hall, frosting hardening on my face, one thought ran through my head on repeat. Fine, you don't want my help now, but I'm still your mother. I am not letting this man ruin your life. That was the night I stopped trying to argue and started planning. Let me be very clear. I'm not talking about anything illegal.
I've lived long enough to know that breaking the law just gives bad people leverage against you. No, I was going to use the boring stuff. Paper, procedure, consequences. Things people like Pastor Dan never think apply to them. Step 1, information. The anonymous texter had given me a starting point. Instagram posts, counseling session dates, Mark's travel. I printed everything. Screenshots, church newsletters, sermon recordings where Pastor Dan alluded to helping a couple in crisis with suspicious timing. Step 2, evidence. I made an appointment with a lawyer, a nice middle-aged woman named Dana with sharp eyes and a sharper bob haircut. I told her everything. About the suspected affair, the pregnancy timing, the wedding drama, the slap, the threat of a restraining order. I don't want to sue anyone, I said. I just want to know what is legal for me to do. Can I gather information? Can I record conversations? What are my rights as a grandmother? Possibly not even a biological one. She listened calmly, took notes, and then walked me through it. Oklahoma is a one-party consent state. That meant I could legally record any conversation I was a part of without telling the other person. That would be important. She also informed me that many denominations and churches have formal complaint and investigation processes for clergy misconduct, even if they pretend they don't, especially when it involves potential sexual relationships with members of the congregation. Your situation is ugly, she said bluntly. But if this pastor is having an affair with a younger congregant, one he's counseling, there are big ethical problems, especially if there's a pregnancy involved. I knew you liked me, I said. She smiled. I'm not saying go on a crusade. I am saying document everything. Don't confront without evidence, and don't publish anything online that could be considered defamation. Keep it all in official channels until it's not your problem anymore. So that's what I did. I bought a cheap little digital recorder and taught myself how to use the voice memo app on my phone better than any 60-year-old woman should have to.
I started showing up at church events again, not to worship, to watch. Whenever Ashley or Pastor Dan talked to me, I let them. I played dumb. I said I was sorry for overreacting at the wedding, that I was working on my attitude. They lapped it up. In one conversation, recorded in the church lobby, Ashley laughed about being so fertile and how it only took one time when Mark got back from his conference. One time can be enough as long as it's with the right person. She smirked. Guess I'm just blessed. In another recording, Pastor Dan pulled me aside. I'm glad you're coming around, Sister Linda, he said in that syrupy tone. The enemy really tried to sow division, but God is bigger. Maybe I just needed to accept God's will, I said, meeting his eyes. You know more about that than I do, Pastor. For a second, something flickered in his expression. Then it was gone. Step 3, follow the money and the schedule. I found out what denomination the church was loosely affiliated with. They weren't completely independent. There was a regional board that handled ordinations, complaints, and so on. I pulled their ethics code from the website and printed it. Lots of language about boundaries, avoiding counseling situations that could lead to temptation, never abusing a position of spiritual authority. Very lofty. I also found the church's tax filings. Thank you, Internet. I noted that Pastor Dan's salary was largely justified by his counseling ministry and community outreach. Interesting. I started a binder. Literally, a big, ugly 4-inch binder with color-coded tabs. Dates, screenshots, transcripts of my recordings, copies of texts Mark had forwarded me months earlier from Pastor Dan that now read differently with hindsight. I also paid a private investigator for exactly 4 hours of work. Nothing illegal, I told him. No hacking, no trespassing. I just want confirmation of whether this man is spending time with this woman alone off church grounds. He got me photos. Blurry, phone quality, but clear enough. One of Pastor Dan and Ashley leaving a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon, his hand low on her back. Another of them walking into a budget hotel on the highway around 9 p.m., and the one that sealed it. Them coming out of the same hotel an hour and a half later. Her hair messy, their faces flushed. I printed those too. Put them in plastic sleeves like they were collectible trading cards.
Step 4, the baby. Now this part was delicate. I wasn't going to sneak DNA or anything insane, but I was going to prepare for when the baby arrived. I talked to Dana again. If it turns out that this child isn't biologically my son's, I asked, what happens? She sighed. Depends. If he knows and signs the birth certificate anyway, or if he stays married and raises the child, he might still be legally on the hook for support down the line. Courts like stable arrangements. What if he was lied to, I asked. Lied to or not, if he accepts paternity, it can be hard to undo, she said. But if you can prove a pattern of deception, and especially if there's a biological father who can be identified, it changes things. Judges don't like fraud. Good, I said. Linda, she added, you need to remember something. Your son is a grown man. You can't drag him into court against his will. All you can do is give him the truth in a way that he can't ignore without choosing to ignore it. I know, I said quietly, but I'm his mother. I'm going to put the truth in front of him. Step 5. Pick the battlefield. I could have confronted them privately, but private confrontations with narcissists and manipulators go nowhere. They twist, they cry, they gaslight. They walk away saying you're the problem. No. If Pastor Dan wanted to run his church like a stage, then the stage was where the curtain was going to fall. Ashley's pregnancy progressed. Her belly grew. The church threw them a big blessing shower, full of Bible verses on chalkboards and pastel cupcakes and little onesies that said things like, fearfully and wonderfully made. I went. I smiled. I gave them a gift card because I refused to buy physical items for a child whose paternity was a question mark. Behind the scenes, I'd already sent a discreet, detailed letter to the regional church board. It wasn't anonymous.
Anonymous complaints get tossed. I put my name, my contact information, and a short summary at the top. Then I attach copies of everything: the photos, the text transcripts, an outline of dates, Mark's trip, counseling sessions, pregnancy announcement, quotes from the ethics code they were violating. I even transcribed part of that conversation I overheard before the wedding. I ended with, "I am not asking you to take my word for anything. I am asking you to investigate. If you choose not to, and harm comes to my son or future grandchild because of this situation, I will have no choice but to pursue other avenues." I sent it certified mail. I tracked the signature. Then I waited. For weeks, nothing obvious changed. Pastor Dan still preached. Ashley still sang. Mark still looked tired but content, rubbing her back in the pews. Then one Sunday, about a month before Ashley's due date, something did change. I walked into the sanctuary and saw 3 unfamiliar men sitting in the front row. Suits, serious faces, clipboards. A fourth person, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, was talking quietly with Karen, the pastor's wife, who looked like she'd been crying for hours. My heart sped up. The worship team looked rattled. Ashley's mascara was already smudged and the service hadn't started yet. When it did, Pastor Dan didn't come out. Instead, one of the suited men walked to the pulpit. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Robert Hayes. I'm with the regional leadership team. I know this is unusual, but we need to address something important today." The room buzzed like a kicked beehive. I felt my palms go sweaty. He talked about how no one is above accountability, how spiritual leaders are held to higher standards, how serious allegations had been brought to their attention, and after a thorough preliminary review, they had placed Pastor Dan on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. There were gasps, cries, a couple of angry shouts. Ashley went pale. Mark put an arm around her, confused. "We ask for your patience and prayers as we walk through this process. We will not be discussing specifics from the pulpit. Those affected directly have already been contacted or will be shortly." He stepped back. The worship team half-heartedly started a song. People sang on autopilot, eyes darting around. After the service, chaos. Some people rushed to comfort Karen, who was surrounded by a few older women. Others clustered around Ashley and Mark, peppering them with questions. I stayed where I was. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to watch the dominoes fall. My phone buzzed. An email. From Regional Board. Confidential. I opened it. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, thank you for bringing your concerns to our attention. We can confirm that the allegations you raised are being taken very seriously. We are conducting a formal investigation, which includes interviewing all parties involved, reviewing communications, and consulting with legal counsel as appropriate. We appreciate the documentation you provided. We may reach out to you for additional information. Sincerely," I exhaled slowly. Game on. The following week, I got a call. "Mrs. Thompson?" It was the woman I'd seen talking to Karen. "My name is Susan Miller. I'm on the ethics committee. We'd like to schedule a time to speak with you." They invited me to a neutral office downtown. No church decor, just beige walls, a conference table, and a carafe of coffee that had seen better days. Susan, Robert, and another man introduced themselves, turned on a recorder, with my permission, and asked me to walk them through everything, from first suspicion to the binder. I did. Calmly. Clearly. No theatrics. Just facts. They asked questions, dates, times, exact wording of things Pastor Dan had said. How sure I was that the hotel photos were of him and Ashley. I answered all of it. When I didn't know something for certain, I said so. Finally, Susan sat back and sighed. "We've already spoken with Pastor Dan," she said. "He denies any inappropriate relationship. He admits to an unwise boundaries and emotional dependency, but insists it was all to help a young couple. Did you show him the photos? I asked. We did, she said. He claims they were meeting to pray. At a motel, on the highway, I said flatly. At 10 at night? Robert rubbed his forehead. We've also spoken with Ashley privately. Her story shifts. I bet it does. Listen, I said, leaning forward. My son worships this man. He trusts him. If you let this go with a slap on the wrist, my son will keep trusting him. My future grandchild will grow up in a church led by a man who sees women as spiritual accessories. And if that baby turns out to be his, not my son's, then this isn't just a moral failing, it's a pattern of abuse of authority. We understand the gravity, Robert said. We also have to be careful. There are legal implications, reputational concerns, families involved. You're worried about a scandal, I said. You should be. But cover-ups make scandals worse. Ask any Catholic. They exchanged glances. We're not asking you to be patient indefinitely, Susan said, but we have to follow a process. In the meantime, Pastor Dan will remain on leave. He will not be counseling or preaching. What about my son? I asked quietly. He still thinks I'm the crazy one. We can't control what he chooses to believe, she said. But if your suspicions about paternity are correct, that will eventually reveal itself. I walked out feeling not vindicated, not yet, just aligned. Like I finally had adults in the room. The real confrontation came a month later. By then, Ashley had given birth, a little boy. They named him Noah. I didn't hear about it from Mark. I saw it on Facebook. A friend of mine sent me a screenshot. Mark in a hospital gown, holding a tiny bundle, looking every bit the proud father. Ashley in the bed, glowing and exhausted. Pastor Dan was nowhere in the pictures, which I found interesting. 2 weeks after the birth, my doorbell rang. I opened it and nearly dropped my coffee. Mark stood there, baby carrier in one hand, diaper bag in the other. He looked like he hadn't slept in a month. Can we come in? He asked. My heart climbed into my throat. Of course, I said, stepping aside. He set the carrier on the couch and unbuckled the blanket. There he was, tiny, pink, blinking up at me with big, dark eyes. My grandson. Maybe. I forced myself not to reach out. He's beautiful, I said softly. Mark swallowed. Mom, I owe you an apology. My eyes snapped to his face. He took a deep breath. You were right. About everything. Apparently, the investigation had progressed. Confronted with mounting evidence and the threat of formal defrocking, Pastor Dan had admitted to a brief moral failing with Ashley.
He insisted it was only once and a mistake, but that was enough. He'd been removed from his position. The church was flailing, members leaving in droves. And then, because God has a sense of timing, the hospital had done routine blood work on baby Noah and flagged an incompatibility. Something minor, but enough that a pediatrician suggested paternity testing light, basically checking if the listed father's blood type matched the assumptions. It didn't. I never paid attention in biology, Mark said bitterly, but when the doctor explains that my blood type and Ashley's blood type physically cannot create Noah's blood type, well, I echoed. He looked shattered. I confronted Ashley. She denied it. Then she cried. Then she said it was an attack. Finally, she admitted it, said it was just once, that she thought the baby was mine, that it shouldn't matter because I'm the one who loves him. I clenched my hands. What did you say? I walked out, he said. I took Noah with me. I went to a hotel. Then I called a lawyer. Good boy.
I also talked to Susan from the board, he added. She told me about your letter, the binder, everything you did. I can't believe I called you crazy. You were in love, I said quietly, and you trusted your pastor. You weren't crazy, just naive. He dropped his head into his hands. What do I do now? I looked at my son, my grown man of a son, broken open on my couch like he was 16 again, and felt anger flare. Not at him, at them. At Ashley, at Pastor Dan, at every person in that church who had watched red flags wave and called them blessings. Here's what you're going to do, I said, voice steady. You're going to protect that baby, you're going to protect yourself, and we're going to make sure the people who did this don't walk away clean. Remember my lawyer, Dana? She earned every penny. Mark filed for divorce. In his petition, he listed adultery with specific dates and times. He attached copies of the board's findings from the church investigation, which, under pressure, they had documented thoroughly. He also requested a court-ordered paternity test. Ashley's lawyer tried to fight it, sobbing in their filings about emotional distress and harassment. The judge, who likely had seen more than his share of messy domestic cases, ordered the test anyway. Surprise! Noah was not biologically Mark's. I will never forget sitting in that courtroom as the results were read. Ashley crying, her parents glaring at me like I'd orchestrated the laws of genetics. The judge looked at Mark. He said, "Do you understand that you have the option here? You can choose to disclaim paternity, which would absolve you of legal responsibility, though it may affect your relationship with the child, or you can accept parental rights and obligations even without biological connection." Mark's jaw clenched. He said, "I love Noah. He didn't ask for any of this. I want joint custody, but I don't want to be lied to. I want the truth on the record." The judge nodded slowly. That's not the most common position, but it's commendable. In the end, Mark got shared legal custody and substantial parenting time. The court recognized him as the psychological father, especially given Ashley's unstable living situation. And the biological father? Well, Pastor Dan had resigned from the church by then, under mutual agreement. He'd tried to quietly take a job in another state, but the regional board, bless their suddenly firm spines, issued a formal statement about his misconduct. He was barred from ministry within that denomination. On top of that, Dana helped Mark file a civil lawsuit against him for intentional infliction of emotional distress and alienation of affection. Not every state recognizes that last one anymore, but Oklahoma does in certain circumstances. Cheating is one thing. Cheating with a spiritual authority who counseled you as a couple, judges don't like that. We didn't expect to win big, we just wanted him on record. It settled out of court. Pastor Dan's insurance and personal funds paid a decent chunk, earmarked in part for Noah's future. Ashley? She went from being the church's golden girl to a pariah overnight. The same women who once gushed over her Instagram devotionals now whispered in the grocery store aisles. Some were cruel about it, and I'll be honest, I didn't like that either. Hypocrites, a lot of them. She tried to spit it as spiritual attack online. That didn't fly when court documents became public record. She moved back in with her parents for a while, tried a different church. From what I hear through the grapevine, it didn't stick. You can't be the center of a worship team when your scandal is a Google search away. As for me,
Remember that threatened restraining order? It never materialized. Instead, a different piece of paper arrived in my mailbox a few months later. A notarized, signed, heartfelt letter from my son. "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I let a pastor and a selfish girl turn me against the one person who always had my back. You tried to warn me, and I called you crazy. I chose them over you. Thank you for not giving up on the truth, even when you couldn't reach me. I promise you this.
I will never let anyone come between us like that again. Love, Mark. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where we'd had so many arguments, and cried like I hadn't cried since my divorce. Not angry tears, just release. It's been 2 years now. Noah is a toddling, sticky-fingered hurricane with big eyes and an even bigger appetite. He calls me Nana and insists on reading the same book 5 times in a row. Whether he's biologically mine or not stopped mattering about 5 seconds after I held him properly for the first time. Mark has full physical custody now. Ashley's visits are supervised because she keeps making erratic choices, poor judgment, bad relationships, the whole sad spiral. I don't hate her. I'm still angry, sure, but mostly I just feel pity. She grew up in a system that told her her only real value was as a pretty thing on a stage and a breeder in a pew. She played the game wrong and lost. Pastor Dan? Last I heard, he's selling cars 3 towns over. Karen divorced him and took the house. Good for her. I hope she finds a quiet little church with a pastor who actually believes his own sermons. Our old church never really recovered. Attendance is half what it used to be. They brought in an interim pastor from outside the area. He's big on transparency, which is ironic when you look at how hard they tried not to have it. I did go back once, just to see. People avoided my eyes, unsure whether to thank me or resent me. I didn't stay. These days, my Sundays are for pancakes with Noah and long walks when my knees cooperate. Mark comes over for dinner twice a week, sometimes 3. Every now and then, he starts to apologize again, and I cut him off. You were lost, I tell him. We've all been lost. You found your way back. That's what matters. He still carries guilt, especially when Noah looks particularly like Pastor Dan at certain angles. But guilt softened by truth is lighter than blind devotion hardened by lies. People love to say, if I were in that situation, I'd never let that happen. They sit on their couches, watching TV dramas, thinking they'd spot the villain instantly, that they'd leave at the first red flag, that they'd somehow be immune to manipulation. Here's what I know at 60. You don't always see the knife until it's already in your back. Sometimes the person holding it is smiling, holding a Bible and preaching about love. Sometimes the person being stabbed is your own kid, and he's thanking the attacker for guidance. Being the one voice shouting, "This is wrong," in a room full of people clapping is lonely. Being slapped, literally and figuratively, for telling the truth hurts like hell. But here's the thing. Truth doesn't care if people believe it. It just sits there, patient, waiting for the day it lines up with reality so neatly that even the most stubborn eyes can't unsee it. My revenge wasn't dramatic screaming or burning it all down. My revenge was paperwork, recordings, a 4-inch binder, and a woman in comfortable shoes walking into yet another office to calmly say, "Here are the facts." My revenge was watching a man who thought he was untouchable lose his platform, his title, and his easy access to vulnerable women. My revenge was my son standing in court with his head held high, saying, "I want the truth on the record." And most of all, my revenge is a little boy in dinosaur pajamas, laughing in my living room, covered in spaghetti sauce, yelling, "Nana, look!" as he builds a tower of blocks as tall as he is. Because for all the drama, all the betrayal, all the tears, they didn't get to break him. They didn't get to break us. So yeah, family drama. Oh yeah, you can watch it on TV and yell at the screen, or you can be a 60-year-old woman in Oklahoma, covered in cake at your son's wedding, knowing that everyone in the room thinks you've lost your mind, and decide, instead of screening, you're going to start documenting. And when the dust settles and the truth is finally standing there, undeniable, you get to sit back, sip your coffee, look at your grandson, and think, turns out I wasn't crazy after all.
So, another story of my grandmother has end and be clicking here you will have when more such stories.